Hare Krishna, dear devotees, and welcome to today's session. How are you doing? I pray that all is well with you and your families at this time. So, as we're going through the study of day to day life and trying to learn what is the best position to take, what is the best way, what is the perfect knowledge? Knowledge comes in different forms, in different ways. And spiritual knowledge has always been appreciated as the highest level of introspection, the highest level of thought, because it deals with the realm that's not physical. So in order to understand it, one needs a certain level of intuition, a certain level of realization. This is why Krishna calls it in the 9th chapter Raja Vidya, the king of knowledge. So there are different levels of knowledge, but that knowledge that helps us understand ourselves and gives us the path, helps us realize the journey back to the spiritual world, that is the best knowledge. That is the perfect knowledge. And in appreciating that as a journey, the first level of knowledge that we come to understand is good and bad. What is good? What is bad? In the yoga system, this is called Yam and Niyam, the eightfold system of Patanjali. In that system, then Yam and Niyam, the what you accept and what you have to give up. And that which you accept, that will become your lifestyle, and gradually that will develop into perfect knowledge. So assessing life at good and bad is the initial stage, it's the primary level, but it's not the end stage. It's not the perfection of knowledge, because the perfection of knowledge is character, not information. So if your character doesn't change, means the knowledge has not impressed you. It's information, and you store it as something that's good that you can use to tell others. But for your own application, because of the weakness of heart, hriday durlabhya, because of that, you don't have the courage to apply it. And if it's not applied, it's not going to change your life. And if it's not applied, then you can't expect change in your life from the same level of consciousness that created it. And so in today's assessment of the Gita, we're learning about good and evil, that this is the primary level of assessment. And unless one comes to terms with what is good and evil, how will one then assess and move on the journey?
From this instant on, vow to stop disappointing yourself. Separate yourself from the mob. Decide to be extraordinary and do what you need to do. Now. What ought one to say then as each hardship comes? I was practicing for this. I was training for this. Fortify yourself with moderation, for this is an impenetrable fortress. If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid. No great thing is created suddenly, any more than a bunch of grapes or a fig. If you tell me that you desire a fig, I will answer that there must be time. Let it first blossom, then bear fruit, then ripen. First, say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do. When you are offended at any man's fault, turn to yourself and study your own failings. Then you will forget your anger. The trials you encounter will introduce you to your strengths. Remain steadfast, and one day you will build something that endures, something worthy of your potential. The world turns aside to let any man pass who knows where he is going. Attach yourself to what is spiritually superior, regardless of what other people think or do. Hold to your true aspirations, no matter what is going on around you. You may fetter my leg, but Zeus himself cannot get the better of my free will. Seek not the good in external things, seek it in yourselves. On the occasion of every accident that befalls you, remember to turn to yourself and inquire what power you have for turning it to use. It is the nature of the wise to resist pleasures, but the foolish to be a slave to them. Caretake this moment, immerse yourself in its particulars. Respond to this person, this challenge, this deed. Quit evasions. Stop giving yourself needless trouble. It is time to really live. If you want to be a writer, write. The key is to keep company only with people who uplift you, whose presence calls forth your best. Be discriminating about what images and ideas you permit into your mind. No man is free who is not a master of himself. If anyone tells you that a certain person speaks ill of you, do not make excuses about what is said of you, but answer, "He was ignorant of my other faults, else he would not have mentioned these alone." It is impossible to begin to learn that which one thinks one already knows. Do not seek to have events happen as you wish, but wish them to happen as they do happen, and all will be well with you. Never depend on the admiration of others. There is no strength in it. Personal merit cannot be derived from an external source.
So we start here, Bhagavad Gita chapter 2 verse number 57. Yah sarvatra na bhishnehas tat prapya shubha shubham nabhinandhati nadvesti tasya pragna pratishtita. Translation: in the material world, one who is unaffected by whatever good or evil he may obtain, neither praising it nor despising it, is firmly fixed in perfect knowledge. So Krishna is explaining perfect knowledge today, and he's saying that one who has understood the balance between even good and evil. Prior to this, we were talking about good and bad, but today Krishna is talking about good and evil. Now, there is a distinct difference between bad and evil. Evil is a state of consciousness that is totally opposite towards self-understanding, self-development, and the journey of spiritual realization. It is the total antithesis of the development of spiritual knowledge or spiritual cognition. This state of consciousness is harmful to their development. As we are assessing this as a concept, this becomes understood as morality. How do you judge morality? How do you judge what is good and what is bad? How do you judge what is good and what is evil? If one judges on the basis of the body, then one will determine that by the physical response. If one gets a good feeling, good response, that is good. And one gets a bad feeling, bad response, or bad reaction, that is bad. But that is only on the physical level. Surely there's higher levels of understanding that can be attained. And we see that in the great histories of the world, like the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, that people may have started off in a bad way, and we strike them off as bad. But in terms of time and in terms of perfecting their lives, they ended up with a good result because at that moment they made the change. So assessing good and evil is very important because the nature of the mind that if it can create good, it can also create evil. It's a very deep thought process to think that one's mind can actually turn against one and turn against the world by a misdirected consciousness. So, understanding good and bad is one level, that's the physical level, but understanding good and evil, that is coming from the mental level. That is coming from the level of the mind. So, both of these, Krishna has addressed the physical level of good and bad, action and reaction to the body, and today is addressing good and evil, action and reaction from the consciousness of the mind. So this is a very deep assessment of oneself, and Krishna is describing this in terms of perfect knowledge. What is perfect knowledge? How do we connect with the system of knowledge, epistemology, the study of knowledge? How do we connect with a system of knowledge that is uplifting and that is good and that facilitates our journey, our shreya, our connection to the spiritual world? How do we get into contact with that? Krishna's assessment of that is first on the bodily level, and now he's assessing this at the level of the mind. To say that unless you synchronize this both, you don't have perfect knowledge. You have information, but you don't have perfect knowledge. Let's see what he puts in the purport. So, purport: there is always some upheaval in the material world which may be good or evil. Yes, as we are assessing what is good and evil in terms of practical application, we can see that the concept of morality is arbitrary. It's based on one's choice. It's based on one's subjective understanding, what you have understood from your own assessment of information. What is moral for you is immoral for me. Let's take the example of meat eating. So we can see in certain cultures it's very moral, but in many cultures it's not so moral. So if you assess this, who determines whether it's moral or not? So that's a physical example on the level of the body and diet. But what about on the level of the mind? Who assesses what is good and what is evil? So we see in the example of the Vedic literature that the three greatest demons were on this planet: Hiranyakashipu, Ravana, Kamsa, Shushupal, Dantavakra. So these people with highly evolved demoniac consciousness, evil consciousness, how do they get that? So on our assessment, we understand them and we demonize them as bad people. But in terms of the Vedic literature, if you read in the 4th canto of the Bhagavad Purana, we'll see that they only took their birth on this planet in that kind of consciousness because the Supreme Lord wanted it. Now, if you assess in the absolute sense, is it good or evil what they did? So you have to study the scripture deeply. You have to study and understand deeply, because they were given the benediction. In the 4th canto, the pastime comes of the 4 Kumaras. And the 4 Kumaras had cursed the gatekeepers, Jai and Vijay, to take 7 lifetimes as devotees or 3 lifetimes as demons. So what do you think they did? They took 3 lifetimes as demons. And they came as Hiranyakashipu, Kamsa, Shushupal, Dantavakra in a process of 3 lifetimes. So, in terms of the absolute level, there is no good and evil. But in terms of the bodily level of consciousness, then we saw them as evil people. But in terms of the absolute level, from the scriptural level, they are the gatekeepers of Vaikuntha. And they took this birth as per the desire of the Supreme Lord. Now if you assess what is good and evil, now if you assess what is good and bad, so therefore to have perfect knowledge, you have to approach a perfect source. The spiritual teacher may not be perfect, but the knowledge he's giving is perfect. So he goes on, one who is not agitated by such material upheavals, who is unaffected by good and evil, is to be understood to be in fixed Krishna consciousness. So if you assess from the body, you'll misunderstand these demoniac personalities. But if you assess from the absolute level, then you can understand, they had a higher purpose. So in one sense, their evil was also good because they served the Supreme Being. So in practical application to our lives, what is good and evil is relative. It's based on your knowledge. It's based on your understanding. So if you see Hiranyakashipu, Kamsa, Dantavakra, Shushupal at the level of the body, then you will demonize them. But if we see them from the level of the soul, on the absolute level, then we can devotionalize them and see them for who they are, that they served, that the higher principle is not good and evil, but that they served. That they serve the Supreme Lord and the desires of the Supreme Lord. So the point being that if we connect to the spiritual platform, if we connect from the level of the soul, then what is good and evil does not matter. What matters is that we serve the Supreme Lord. We connect to the spiritual platform. So as we assess this from the level of the mind, practically for ourselves in this material world, we can see that whatever good or bad or whatever good or evil is coming to us or goes away from us, this is all relative. If we're connecting on the spiritual platform, Shreya Nishtita Bruhitan Me, that always has to be there. We always have to be focusing on the goal. If we focus on the goal, then the events on the way, be they good or bad, they'll have their effect, but they won't distract us from the goal. So if we see this practically also, we know that the evil consciousness can be used to manipulate people. And we're very familiar with this, the tantric processes where people use tantra to disturb other people and to disturb other people's minds and lives. So if something like this is happening to you right now, then one should seek the right kind of people to help them out. The cycle of Tantra usually takes 7 years. That the longest effect of whatever was done at the bodily level will take about 7 years at its max. But if one is focusing one's energy, one's thought, one's life process on the spiritual platform in devotion, then these things become insignificant and gradually they'll fade away even faster. So this is the art of devotional living. This is the art of spiritualizing oneself and one's consciousness. So he goes on, as long as one is in the material world, there is always the possibility of good and evil because this world is full of duality. Yes, the dual nature of this world. So you can't live in the nature of this world and expect only good to happen. That is a false idea. Somehow advertising and the falsity of the mind has convinced us that one can actually live without the dual effect of this world coming upon them. This is not possible. This is not possible. Every aspect of life has a dual result. Whatever you do in this material world, one can see it as 50% good and 50% bad. Anything. If you buy something, if you eat something, if you enjoy something, 50% of that, if you sit down and think about it, you can also see the bad of it. And 50% of that, if you sit down and think about it, you can also see the good of it. So everything has its good and bad feature. Now the choice is which part of it are you focusing on? If you're focusing on the good, then you have the good experience. And if you're focusing on the bad, then you'll have the bad experience. So ultimately, perfect knowledge empowers you to make choices. How do you choose? So Krishna is saying, learn how to see both. If you see that when the good comes, it's good, and when the so-called bad comes, it's helping me focus on the Shreya. So I don't think that I am this body. I don't get caught up in the effects and the reactions of this body. I focus on the long-term goal. So because most of the time, the bad effects that are coming upon us end up being the good effects for the spiritual part. Isn't it? Most of the time, until something bad happens, we don't become seriously spiritual. Until a serious effect happens in our life, we don't take spiritual life serious enough. So God has to do something now. We are so stubborn in nature that God has to do something to make us focus on the Shreya, the ultimate goal. And this is what he does. And how do we see it? We see it as a cycle. We see it as a cycle. It's a good cycle and it's a bad cycle. It comes now, I'm experiencing a good cycle, and in a short while there'll be something that will come as a bad cycle. So we see that amongst all the denominations of time. Every aspect of time, from the second to the minute to the hour to the day to the month to the year to the lifetime, we see that in every denomination of time, the cycle of good and bad occurs. So if we assess this is perfect knowledge. And if we're getting to understand how this is working practically in our lives, we can change our lives for the good, for the better, and make it the best. But one who is fixed in Krishna consciousness is not affected by good and evil. Why? Because he is simply concerned with Krishna, who is all good, absolute. So this is the level of spiritual consciousness, that for one who's a devotee, he's not concerned about the good and bad. The duality is only affecting the body and the mind. It's not affecting the soul. So if his work is done at the level of the soul, devotional service, if he's doing devotional service, he's not going to be affected by the good and bad. He's not going to be affected by the duality, which affects us only at the body and the mind. So Prabhupada is making this point: root yourself at the devotional level, create a devotional lifestyle. And once you do this, your life will improve on all levels, on the physical level, on the mind level, and on the soul level. All levels of your life improve. Just see. Such consciousness in Krishna situates one in a perfect transcendental position called technically samadhi. So just see, just by connecting on the spiritual platform, what is the result? Samadhistasya Keshava. You remember this? We did this a few days ago. Sthita pragya, the symptom of the sthita pragya. Sthita pragya ka bhasha sa samadhistasya Keshava. Sthitadir kim prabhaseta kim aseta brajeta kim. How does he sit? How does he walk? How does he act? How does he speak? And what is his language? Remember these four things that was described as the Sthita Pragya. This is happening all because one is rooted on the spiritual platform. So Krishna is encouraging you today, Arjun, address the good and evil. Address yourself at the level of the mind by rooting yourself at the level of the soul. If you connect yourself at the level of the soul, then you can experience life which is completely balanced. And the symptoms of that will be enchanting for anyone who meets you in this world.